Thanks, Chad. Thanks so much. And recognize a lot of you up here on the screen. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces. Good to be with you. Awesome to be with you. So yes, indeed, my name is Ed Gerber. For those of you who don't know, I recently transitioned from Willoughby Christian Reformed Church into Trinity Western University, where I am now University Chaplain, Director of Student Ministries, and also teaching. So I'm having a great time there. It's a wonderful environment to be in. Trinity Western is trying to hold the fort and trying to be faithful. So it's good to be there, and it's a delight here to have this conversation with Ivan. I have known Ivan since I was a Callow college student. Probably, I think it was my first year of college or second year of college entering. At that time, I was at Douglas College in New Westminster. And Ivan had, I don't know how recently, maybe 3 to 5 years before, finished a master's degree under the tutelage of J.I. Packer at Regent College here in Vancouver. There was quite a star-studded cast of faculty at that time, including Bruce Waltke and Packer and some other big names that you would recognize. Ivan has taught at Trinity Western University for the last 30 years. But this was very much a bivocational enterprise for him because he was working full-time as a police officer for the Vancouver Police Department here in VPD. So he worked the beat, and when I was young, I would go with him on ride-alongs, which was a blast, because when you're in a cop car, apparently you get to go through red lights whenever you want to. At least that's how I've been treated the game. But just joking, of course. But yeah, so he was on the beat for a while, and then he did a variety of different detective work. So he was moved into the place of detective. And just to give you some of the titles that he was detective in the Sex Crimes and Child Abuse Unit. He was detective in the Domestic Violence and Criminal Harassment Unit, detective in the Criminal Intelligence Unit, and then I believed he finished out his career in the Financial Crime Unit also as detective, which he said to me at one point, and he can confirm this in our conversation if he likes, that was definitely the most challenging of all of them in terms of convicting people, because boy, can you hide things with finances. So, but he has recently retired from the VPD after 27 years in the force. He specializes in wisdom literature in his study, although has an expansive knowledge of both Old Testament and New Testament. But the reason wisdom literature is the specialty now is because he got to work alongside Bruce Waltke. I went to my cupboard here 2 seconds ago, my bookshelf. This was Waltke. I don't know if any of you have this. It's the huge 2-volume set that it took Waltke, I believe it was a quarter of a century to produce, after he realized that a lot of the Proverbs are interlinked by into sections, and so have kind of a coherence in a literary fashion. And so he had to go back and not look at them atomistically, but as they were related to one another. And then Ivan got together with Waltke and popularized this work really and condensed it into, as you can see, a much thinner version. This one only runs about 450 pages before the endnotes. So that is an Erdmans, published by Erdmans, and he's recently just worked on a commentary for the Gospel Coalition, and I think that is now complete, but I don't know whether that's published yet or not. Ivan, you could speak to that in a moment. He's married to his beautiful wife, Carol, and he has 2 grown-up children, and he attends TriCity Church. So Ivan, it is indeed a delight to have you here, and especially as we've been friends for so long. You've been a great gift to me and an encouragement in the ministry.
Thank you, Ed, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, everybody, for inviting me and letting me talk to you all a little bit about the Book of Proverbs. It's a great privilege for me. And I'm just looking forward to the conversation. And yes, this work on Proverbs that I started in 2016, I think finally finished it somewhere in 2022, mainly because I had to work on it part-time, because I was still working full-time, and I come home and then spend a couple of hours on the commentary before dinner and so forth. So I retired from the police department in January, thinking that, sorry, not January, last July, thinking that I would have more time on my hands to do other things, but it hasn't turned out that way. In fact, I think I'm more busier now than ever before, although I'm not making as much money. So I'm really happy to be here and help you all to, I guess, understand a little bit more about the Book of Proverbs and its importance for us as Christians, and the great gift that God has given us in this book, which I don't think many Christians fully appreciate or understand, because I don't think they're aware of what kind of a book this book is. So maybe we can talk about all of that. So I'm looking forward to it. And once again, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
And I think it's fair too to mention this is kind of slated as marriage and sexuality in the Book of Proverbs, but I think later on in the questions and throughout, if there are nuggets that you want to share with us in terms of what you learned from the Book of Proverbs, I think that's fair game. And it would be beneficial for all of us if you share some of that wisdom. I guess I'd just like to open by asking you what surprised you as as people study, as they go in depth on things, they're normally surprised by something. Was there anything that surprised you in your study of Proverbs in particular, and the wisdom literature in general, perhaps?
Yes, once you start working with this book, you are surprised by it. Several things surprised me. I'll just point out a couple of things. The first thing that really surprised me was that the Book of Proverbs is not a how to become wise book primarily, but a how to become righteous book. That is its main concern. The book is there to develop godly character. And you see this right in the introduction to the book in verse 3, chapter 1, verse 3. The first 7 verses of the book are the introduction to the book. And it states the whole purpose of the book, the audience to whom the book is written, what it's written, what it is about, and why it is written, to whom it is written, etc. And in chapter 1, verse 3b, it tells you that the purpose of learning wisdom is in order to cause the person to become a righteous, just, and fair character. So the purpose is to develop moral character, godly character in the people. Not particularly to make them wise, but to make them wise in this direction. And the reason for that is very simple, because wisdom is a neutral it's a neutral entity. You can use wisdom for good or for evil. And as we all know, some of the greatest villains in our history have been very wise people. They have been very smart, shrewd, cunning, prudent people, but have used all of that for evil purposes. And so the book wants to safeguard that, and so shapes its wisdom in order to create a wise, a just, righteous, and fair character. And so that was a surprising thing. It's not a how to do book even, or a how to become wise book. It is a how to become righteous, how to become godly book. It is a massive education in godly character, a character transforming book. So that was the first thing that surprised me. The second thing that surprised me was that this book is a massive parental manual. It is a manual for parents on how to train up children in the wisdom of the Lord. And that is important because it is really the only book in the Bible that has this very purposeful purpose, which is to educate the children in Israel. If you are familiar with wisdom literature as a genre, if you look at the other cultures around Israel, they all produce wisdom literature. Whether it was the Mesopotamian or Babylonian or Egyptian culture, they all produced wisdom literature. But their wisdom literature was tightly tightly safeguarded amongst the elites. The wisdom was only for the rulers, for the priests, for the sages, and so on and so forth. It was not for the common people. It was to teach rulers how to rule and priests how to perform their duties and judges how to judge and so forth. And so every one of these other wisdom literatures that we have, and we've discovered a whole host of them, numerous other wisdom literatures, they're all addressed to the sage's son or to a king or to a priest and so forth. Now, when you look at Solomon's wisdom in the book of Proverbs, you'll notice it begins, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, and then it moves immediately into the purpose clause. What it is missing there in between is the particular person to whom the book was addressed, which technically should have been Solomon's son, Rehoboam. But it leaves that particular audience blank. And by doing that, Solomon has democratized his wisdom. And in Israel, their wisdom was for all people, not just for the elite. And this is a massive thing, because in Israel, their anthropology was all people are created in God's image, and all people are to be a kingdom of priests for him. And so everybody needs God's wisdom, not just the elite. And so Solomon wrote this book. Other people, of course, added to it over time. The book was produced over several centuries before it reached its final form. And then put it in the hands of Israel's parents to teach to their children. And that was another surprising thing that I found. So the sad thing is, I have, when I was a young parent, I went to many seminars on parenting and took many classes on parenting and all of this, but very rarely would the Book of Proverbs be brought up as a dedicated parenting manual. And that's what it is. And if we want to raise up godly children, we need to know this book.
Can I follow up with two questions here? The first is that you suggest it's a book, not particularly how to become wise, but how to become righteous. And the distinction there is that the person who is wise can use their wisdom for good or ill. But then my question is, how would you define the fool in Proverbs then? So for example, the person who uses their wisdom for evil ends, would Solomon, the author of Proverbs, would he call that person wise? Or would he, because I would consider him a fool.
Sorry, say that last part again. I can't quite.
So if somebody uses their wisdom for evil ends, would the author call that person wise?
Our author?
Yes, would Solomon call that person wise? So then can you do some distinguishing or nuancing there for us in terms of what constitutes or what defines wisdom then for Solomon? If you said the person who uses it for evil ends, they use wisdom, but they're not considered wise. So how do we parse that a little bit?
Well, they would be considered wise, but they wouldn't be considered righteous. So the opposite of righteous in the book of Proverbs is the wicked. And when you read the book, and you read the Proverbs about the wicked, it's clear that they are able to do all kinds of things that to promote their agenda. And they can even take control of society for a while. They can dominate society and take over, but eventually they'll be overthrown. So maybe I can go into a bit of a definition of wisdom at this point, and it might help us. The way Proverbs describes wisdom, and in order to understand the wisdom as the book of Proverbs defines it, you need two words. There are two key words in the definition. One is order, and the other is skill. And these two words, if you put them together, what it means is wisdom is first of all, the recognition that God has created the world in and with order. And then wisdom is the skill to live in that order, under that order, so that you maximize benefit for yourself and for others. It's the skill to live within order. But the recognition of that order is key, that God has not created a chaotic universe. He has not created an immoral universe. He has created a moral universe, and the wise recognize that and live within those boundaries. There are two types of order that God has established in creating the world. One is the physical order. That is the business of scientists. They study all of that. The universe is created according to order. If I drop my phone, it's going to go down, not up. And the fact that the sun rises and sets in a certain order and so forth, you have that. But there is also moral order that God has built into the creation. And it is the job of the sage to study the moral principles by which God has created the universe, and then formulate those principles into proverbs, into sayings, so that the wise can live within the bounds of God's moral order. So, for example, one of these moral orders would be, if you want to have a healthy life yourself and a healthy society, you do not go around committing adultery. That is not a wise way to live within the created order. And so wisdom is recognizing God's moral order and the skill to live within that order so that you maximize benefit for yourself and for others. That's a key concept of the word righteous in the book of Proverbs. The word righteous in the book of Proverbs is a very social, relational concept. It is not the exact, in Proverbs, it does not have the exact meaning, like, for example, righteous has in the forensic Pauline understanding of righteousness. In Proverbs, the word righteous means the willingness to disadvantage yourself in order to advantage others. So it's a very social, relational concept. The righteous person is one who is willing to sacrifice themselves, himself or herself, for the sake of the other, to advantage the other instead of oneself. The opposite of that is the wicked person. The wicked person advantages self by disadvantaging others. And so the wicked can be wise, but they use their wisdom to exploit, to rob, to steal, and to cheat from others to their own benefit.
Ivan, going back to this order, I love this. It's very clarifying, especially when you understand Genesis 1 within its ancient Near Eastern context as a functional ontology. That it's not concerned predominantly with material origins, but it's concerned with the functions and everything functioning within the designated order. But one of the paradoxes that strikes me here is that one can live within the physical order, i.e., as a man with a woman, but be out of the moral order if she is not with your wife. And so one of the things we see in the contemporary scene today is that people are living in a kind of monolithic way where they're looking at the physical order alone. And we've eclipsed from the equation the moral order in many of this. If it feels good, do it, right? If it works, do it. Simply in a raw kind of physical way. So that's more of an observation than a question. But here's a question for you. I wonder if you could comment in light of what you said about wisdom on Proverbs 25, verse 2. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter. To search out a matter is the glory of kings.
Right. Okay. Let's Let me get that text up before me.
Because it seems to bespeak an anthropology of that God has created this world with order, but part of the human vocation is to understand it.
Right. Okay, so let's look at this, because this is an often misunderstood proverb. So let's look at what it is saying here. This proverb comes under the category of the king. There are a number of proverbs that are related to how kings should govern their people. So here you have, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, to search out a matter is the glory of kings. So see, one of the difficulties about the book of Proverbs is it is all the Proverbs are written in poetry, in Hebrew poetry, and Hebrew poetry is a difficult kind of poetry, because Hebrew poetry does not rely on the kind of schematics that English poetry depends upon. It's a different animal altogether. So here you have a type of parallelism, which is the kind of poetry, one aspect of Hebrew poetry, where the A line and the B line are both talking about glory. And the point is, what gives glory to each of these two beings? What gives God glory and what gives the king glory? What makes God glorious and what makes the king glorious? And then, of course, you have to deal with what does the word glory mean? Glory means, the word glory here means social weight, majesty, the sense of awe that you feel. That's what the word glory means. So what gives us a sense of awe with God is the fact that God is not totally comprehensible. He is hidden. His whole essence is not revealed to us. We will never fully understand God, because the moment we do, we will become God. There is a mystery, there is a hiddenness to God, and that hiddenness, that mystery, gives God glory in our sight, that we will never fully figure him out. Now, conversely, what gives the king social weight and what makes the king awesome to the people is the fact that the king knows everything about his kingdom. There is nothing hidden from the king. There is nothing that can rise up and hit him, and he would say, well, I didn't know about that. I had no idea that was going on in my kingdom. He has thoroughly searched out the nature of his kingship, the nature of his kingdom, and nothing can take him by surprise. That kind of a king, that kind of a leader is respected by people and is held in awe by the people. So I think that is what that proverb is talking about. What gives each of these beings their social weight.
Wonderful. That's super helpful. So unfortunately, we can't develop the kind of anthropology I was hoping to develop from that verse. Nonetheless, it's super rich. Also, I noticed in the Hebrew that both the oppositional lines begin with kavod. The Hebrew starts kavod, and then the second line kavod, vakavod, which is great. But can we develop that sort of anthropology from the Book of Proverbs, where God has created? I'm just thinking about kind of a reformed lens of vocation, and every square inch, and that our work is our worship, and thinking God's thoughts after him is a part of the human vocation. And so discovering the wonder of God's creation is a glory to God. Can we find that kind of anthropology in Proverbs, or not so much?
100% you can, because the Book of Proverbs, as I said, is a teaching manual for parents and teachers to give to their sons and children, that covers every topic that has to do with life. It covers work, it covers money, it covers how you talk, it covers how you lead, it covers how you marry, it covers how you treat subordinates, how you treat superiors, how you relate to God, how you relate to the poor, how you relate to the rich. Every possible aspect of life under God's kingdom, under God's world, under the sun, is covered by this book. And so every square inch of the world, every square inch of the human life is claimed by God. And here's the other aspect of that. The book recognizes that just about everything that humans can do and do can be done either wisely or foolishly. Okay, everything, whether it's how you drive your car, or whether it's how you relate to your neighbor, or whether it's how you bank, or whether it's how you spend your time in your entertainments. Everything can be done either wisely or foolishly. And the book is hoping to teach you how to do all of those things wisely in a way that brings glory to God, success to yourself, and success to others.
So I'd love to nail down, before we get into sex and marriage, as it were, I'd love to nail down some of the specifics around parental wisdom. And maybe we could use the theme of what surprised you, or what really resonated with your heart in a powerful way, in terms of how ought a parent today raise their child in a way that is wise. But before you say that, I'm wondering if you can just talk about a much talked about phrase and necessary understanding is, what is the fear of the Lord? We are told that the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom throughout Scripture, not just this book. What does it mean?
The fear of the Lord is it's a complicated term. And it is a term that you have to keep together, the Yurat Adonai, the fear of the Lord. In other words, what I'm saying is you cannot take each of these terms apart and try to understand them on their own and put them together. You cannot take fear on its own and understand that, and then take the Lord on its own and understand that. You have to keep the phrase together, just like you have to keep butterfly together. You cannot understand a butterfly, what a butterfly is, by taking out butter and taking out fly and trying to understand each of those terms on their own and then putting together. You won't understand what a butterfly is. They're two separate words, but when they come together, they create a new concept, a new word. And so it is with the fear of the Lord. What I have found is basically the fear of the Lord is tantamount to a robust saving faith in God. That's really what it is ultimately. That you believe in God with everything, with your heart, soul, mind, and muchness, or everything, and you're willing to obey Him and sacrifice everything for Him. That's really what the fear of the Lord is. If you look at all the different places where the fear of the Lord is used, it nuances all of that a little bit. So, for example, in Psalm 19, you have the fear of the Lord being put in basically synonymous parallelism with the law of the Lord, with the commands of the Lord, with the decrees of the Lord.
Yeah.
So that is part of the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is a respect and an understanding of His word, of His law, of His edicts. That is a form of the fear of the Lord. If you look at the Genesis 22, where Abraham was told to offer up his son Isaac, after he was about to do that and he was stopped, the angel of the Lord says to him, do not harm the boy, for now I know that you fear me. I would have thought it would have said, now I know that you love me, but it doesn't. It says, now I know that you fear me. There we see the fear of the Lord is this willingness to obey the Lord, even in the most difficult of circumstances, that it's absolute obedience to God. That is an aspect of the fear of the Lord. And of course, believing in God, faith in God. So that's what the fear of the Lord means.
Yeah. So really kind of an objective and a subjective element to it. Yeah. God's word on the foundation, and also revering.
And in Proverbs 1 verse 7, when it says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, The beginning, the word for beginning there does not mean that it is like the starting point of a race, that you then, the object is to get as far away from it as quickly as possible. That is not the metaphor that describes the word beginning there. The metaphor that would describe the word beginning here is like a ladder that you climb, but you can never cut off that first step. You can never leave that first step. The whole ladder will fall apart. So the fear of the Lord for wisdom is the beginning, the center, the end. It is the whole process. It is the way by which you understand God's wisdom. You have to have this humble, broken, and obedient, believing attitude with God.
It's Jesus picks this up, doesn't he, when he talks about the stand and being the solid ground, building on the rock. And the fear of the Lord is that rock.
Yes, and he says there, the wise man built his house upon the rock. It's wisdom to build on the rock. And of course, today, Jesus is that rock that we build on.
That's right.
He is the wisdom of God for us.
So let's press in a little bit on this question of parental wisdom, and maybe some nuggets that you found in Proverbs about, and maybe as it's particularly germane to our day. I mean, parenting has always been difficult, but today it may be more difficult than at other times.
Right. So getting to the narrowing it down now to a little bit around marriage and parenting. What I discovered is the book of Proverbs would argue that the secret to a wise marriage is not so much finding the right person as it is being the right person. That is one of its keys. Its keys is not primarily to teach you how to find the right person. It'll talk about the importance of finding the right person, but the main point is that you yourself have been transformed into wisdom, into a wise person, so that then you will choose a wise partner for life. In fact, according to the book of Proverbs, you have to marry 2 women, and you have to marry them in the right order. And the first woman you're supposed to marry is a woman wisdom. You'll see this, for example, in Proverbs chapter 4. You can see it in other places as well, but let me just say a few things about Proverbs chapter 4. This is a lecture by the father to his son, talking him about the importance of wisdom. And so chapter 4, verse 1, listen, my sons, to a father's instruction, pay attention to gain understanding. There is the admonition. But then he moves on. I give you sound learning and so forth. I'll tell you what my father taught me. Verse 5, get wisdom, get understanding. Do not forget my words or turn away from them. Do not forsake wisdom, and she will protect you. And now what I want you to see here is how these verbs that he's going to use are all taken from the marriage and romance register, as opposed to the intellectual register. So he says, do not forsake wisdom, that is, abandon wisdom. Love her, and she will watch over you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom, though it costs you all you have, get understanding. Cherish her, and she will exalt you. Embrace her, and she will honor you, and she will give you a garland to grace your head, and so forth. So there you see this woman wisdom personified, as a bride to be married. And the word kana here, to get, is also the word that is normally used for the bride price that someone would pay to obtain a bride. So the secret to a wise marriage and sexuality is to, first of all, you yourself marry woman wisdom, and then she will help you to find the right human spouse. that will enhance your life and as opposed to destroying your life. But the Proverbs are very clear that the wrong wife will be disastrous. She will drive you to the corner of the roof and then further from there into the desert if you are not careful. And so it has much teaching on all of that. So I don't know if that is good enough for this question to start with, and then I can keep going. So
Sure.
be the right person.
Maybe it's helpful. We can kind of skip over the parental advice, and we're kind of centering here on marriage, which is fine, and finding the right bride. Maybe you can jump. I don't know how much time we have, but I think Proverbs 31 it looms large in this book, and there's been difficulty understanding it, and how do we apply it today in a more egalitarian society, those sorts of things. So maybe you could say something about the virtuous wife, or whatever the titular is for that text nowadays.
Right, okay. One more thing I would say about Proverbs and marriage is two things that are made very clear in the book of Proverbs. The first point is made very clear in the rest of the Bible as well, and that is all of its direct and implied statements on marriage assume very clearly a heterosexual marriage. And furthermore, the book of Proverbs absolutely from beginning to end assumes a monogamous marriage, not a polygamous marriage. All the texts in Proverbs on marriage assume one husband and one wife, not a husband and multiple wives. There is absolutely no advice about a husband having more than one wife. So those two are very significant, even though the rest of the Bible in places tacitly assumes polygamy, and many of the patriarchs and so forth, and many of the leaders of the Bible had more than one wife. The book of Proverbs clearly states that God's wisdom is limited to a marriage in which there are only two heterosexual partners. That's it. All right, you want to jump into Proverbs 31?
Let's do it.
All right, I do actually have a PowerPoint here, but I don't know if it's necessary for me to share that. The main problem with Proverbs 31 is the main issue people have with this is this a real woman or is it an ideal woman? Is what is being described here a flesh and blood person, or is it an ideal, or is it a portrait of wisdom, woman wisdom herself? And the answer is, I do not think so. I think it is describing a real woman, a real flesh and blood woman. And we can talk about the reasons why I think so. But I think it's a real person. And the purpose of this poem, these 22 verses rather, they are a poem on the what I would call the valiant wife. And as you know, it's written in it's a complete acrostic, right? The poem is in every verse begins with the next letter of the Hebrew alphabet. So it's an acrostic. It's a poem, and it is describing, I believe, an actual real person. Now, what is it doing here? Well, this is interesting because this poem is the lesson that was taught to King Lemuel by his mother. So this chapter 31 contains two poems. Verses 1 to 9 are a poem on how to be a wise king. And then 10 following is how is describing what King Lemuel should look for in a wise and powerful wife. So it's advice from a mother to her son, her royal son, on what to look for in a wife. And so a very important point to note here is that this whole portrait of the woman is given from the feminine point of view. It is the mother describing another woman to her son. It is not given from the male perspective. It is given from the female perspective. So keeping those in mind, the first thing we would want to deal with is, how do you translate her description, the Eshet Hayil? How is that translated? And the translations struggle with this, but my own translation of that is a valiant wife. That's how I ultimately translate it, valiant wife. And the reason why I translate it that way is because the description, and here I'm relying on a work by Al Walters, who did a very helpful scholarly work on this, and pointed out that the descriptions of this woman are taken from from heroic literature, the literature of heroes, who are primarily heroes in the battlefield. It is heroic battlefield imagery that is taken and then applied to the domestic sphere to describe this woman. She is really a warrior, but her battlefield is not a literal battlefield of war. Her battlefield is the domestic sphere in which she triumphs as a hero. So that is why I think a valiant wife is the best description of her. So is she real? Well, she is, but of course we have to keep in mind that this is a poem, and poetry uses imagery and hyperbole and all of that to describe it. So it's not being described in literal prose, it's described in poetry. So you have to take into account the imagery and so forth. For example, a good compliment to this poem would be David's poem about Saul and Jonathan. That's a heroic poem. And, you know, he will talk about Saul and Jonathan being swifter than eagles, more stronger than lions, and so forth, right? So we understand that he's using imagery and hyperbole to describe these people, and we have no problem with that. So similarly, some of that hyperbole and so forth is brought in to describe this wife. And so we have to keep that in mind as we go along. Even though she is a real person, she is being described in the genre of heroic poetry. The reason for that acrostic, why did they write in acrostic? Probably two reasons. One is to give the idea that they've handled the subject fully and completely. This is the A to Z on this topic. And so that could be one reason. The other reason, I think, is for memory. They could remember it better. We are a reading culture, but they were a memory culture. And so writing in an acrostic could help them memorize it better, I would think. So that is the acrostic. And it's also beautiful and artistic. And so that's the reason for that. It's a very well-structured poem. There are 3 parts to it. And if you want, I can just share this PowerPoint. Would that help, or should I just keep it?
Help.
Okay, so
Just
let me see if I can share this here.
Yep.
Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, so let me go to. So you can see the structure here. Verses 10 to 12 is the introduction, where you have her value. And then you have the main body, which is verses 13 to 27, her works. And then you have the conclusion, verses 28 to 31, her veneration. So her value, her works, and her veneration. So the structure, her value, let's just quickly go over this. Her value is in verses 10 to 12 are described in 2 ways. Her value in general, a valiant wife who can find her prices far beyond rubies is the normal, very common translation, but they didn't have rubies back then. In Solomon's day, they did not have rubies. The word literally means coral. I guess that was very precious back then, but today you can find coral in dollar stores. So the translators of the Bible had to find a dynamically equivalent term, and so they chose rubies. But it's just showing her value. She is super valuable if you find a wife like this. Oh, and by the way, she has been found. A wife like this has been found because she is married. So it's this kind of a person is not beyond the pale. They are there. They're not easy. You won't find them in the regular places you go to look for wives in the bars or Tinder or whatever. But they are there. Then you have her value specifically to her husband. And here is a very remarkable point. It says that the heart of a husband, batach, trusts in her. That is such an important thing, because in the Bible, in the Old Testament, to trust, the verb trust is never used of anything other than God. Wow. Only God is the subject of, is the object of the verb trust. There is one other place in Judges 20, verse 23, where the word is used to describe trusting between two human groups. And this is the one other place where the word trust is used of a human being. And it's about the husband trusting his wife. So it's a very high designation. He trusts in her. And the reason is very simple, because she provides for him and she only does him good all the days of her life. So that's her value. I'm moving quickly here. Then you get to the main section, which is her works in 13 to 27, and they are described in three ways. Her business and her generosity to her family and to the poor outside, and her blessing and the blessing she is to her family. This wife is a hard worker. She starts with the cottage industry of weaving, making textiles, but she doesn't buy textiles and turns them into clothes. She actually starts by collecting the raw material and weaving the cloth together. And she uses two types of product, wool and fiber, plant fiber, to create from scratch. She goes and she collects the bits of wool, and then she washes it and dries it and weaves it into thread, and then weaves the threads into cloth. Similarly, she goes and she finds the flax and she teases out the fibers of the flax, soaks that, dries it, makes turns it into fabric, and then turns the fabric into clothing, and she sells it. So an incredibly hard-working woman. And as a result, her business is successful. She's able to sell these clothes. She's able to trade them, and she's able to provide luxuries even for her family. And verses 19 to 20, she reaches to the poor as well, and then she blesses her family. What is interesting here is this. The next slide will show this. Let me see if I can get my... Right, you can see that, right? Yeah. The body, her works, is put into the form of a chiasm. This whole section, 13 to 27, is written in the form of a chiasm. And it's very interesting to see where the center of the chiasm is. Now, if you're familiar with chiasms, you know that the center point is the most important. That is where the author wants you to focus your attention, because that is where he will put the center point. So what is the center point of this chiasm? Let's see as we go along here. Sorry, here you have A at the very top, verse 19, she extends her hands to the distaff and her hands hold the spindle. That's verse 19. Opposing that at the bottom is verse 27. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. That's A prime. So you have A and A prime. Well, what is B and B prime? B is verse 20. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hand to the needy. Matching that at the bottom, B prime, she opens her mouth with wisdom and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. So she is a teacher of wisdom to her family, to her children, and so forth. C, verse 21, she is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. By the way, if any of you need, I can give you this PowerPoint if you want it. Matching that, C prime is verse 25, strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the time to come. So she's well equipped. She does not have to worry about the weather or disaster. She has money saved and so forth to help her. D, verse 22, she makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. This is important to note here because even though she's hardworking and producing for others, she has no problem benefiting herself from her product. So she doesn't dress in rags or anything like that. She buys nice stuff and she has nice stuff for herself as well, and her beds and so forth. Matching that, D prime is she makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchants. And now we get to the very center, and that is verse 23. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. The key to her work and industry is to free up her husband from the domestic responsibilities so that he can lead in the public sphere. That is the point of this poem. So her husband is known in the gates. The word gates there in the Bible, anytime you see the word gates in the Bible, it is referring to basically City Hall, our version of City Hall. Because the gates of the city was where all the business and the justice of the city was carried out, the business of the city was carried out, where the leaders of the city met to discuss the city matters. And so if a husband is known in the gates, that means her husband is a leader in City Hall. He is one of the elders of the city. And he sits among the elders of the land. So as a result of having a wife like this, the husband is able to use his gifts of leadership to lead in the community. The Book of Proverbs is absolutely clear that it is males that lead in the home and in the government, in society, and on the women lead in the area of domestic and home affairs. That is taken for granted, as it is pretty much in the whole rest of the Bible. So this, it's interesting because some people will critique this poem and say, well, that's great, the wife is doing all the work while the husband gets to sit around. Well, the problem is chapter 31 is the end of the Book of Proverbs. This poem is the end of the Book of Proverbs. All the rest of the Proverbs are what the man should do. Okay, so this poem assumes that a husband has done everything that the first 30 chapters of the Book of Proverbs has told the males to do. He is not a lazy person just sitting there. He has married wisdom. He has learned to speak well. He has learned how to manage his money. He's done all of that. Just a humorous anecdote here. I had a friend, and she was a great woman, but couldn't find a life partner that she really wanted to. And so she went to one of the sites that matches you up, not one of these seedy sites, but to a serious site that matched Christians with each other. And so she put her profile out there, and the question she always got from males was, "Are you a Proverbs 31 woman?" And she would answer, first of all, yes, and so forth. But eventually she got tired, and she would then answer, "Yes, I am a Proverbs 31:10 to
Thank you.
woman. Are you a Proverbs 1:1 to 31:9 man?"
Yeah.
And that's how she decided to answer that. So finally, as we move down, we get to the conclusion, her veneration. She receives basically every group that she benefited now turns around to praise her and bless her. She receives veneration from her children. They rise and call her blessed. Her husband also, and the word also there means he also rises when she comes into the room and praises her. And then from the whole community praises her because her husband talks about her at his work in the gates, and so she is praised by the whole community. And what what this poem does is very important. Let me get to the actual poem itself. It forms an inclusio with the opening introduction, because if you notice, it ends, her children rise and call her blessed. Where do I want here?
28, verse 28. Verse 28.
Yeah, her children rise and her husband also, and he praises her. Many women have done noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Now, if you remember, verse 7 of chapter 1 talked about the son, the male, who is supposed to fear the Lord as the beginning of wisdom. And now here at the very end, you have the woman who fears the Lord. And so that forms an inclusio. Many people wonder, where is the woman in the book of Proverbs? The whole book of Proverbs is addressed to the male. There is no address in it to the daughters of the family. So where is the woman? Does this book not apply to women? Do they not need to read it? The answer, of course, is absolutely not. The woman is assumed in the book of Proverbs, even though she is not directly addressed. The daughter is assumed, but even though she's not directly addressed. And the reason why only the sons and the males are addressed is because the book is written in a culture where the males were the leaders. And so they were the ones who were directly addressed. It was the male who left the home to go and form a new home. The woman stayed until a man came and married her and took her out of the home. And if nobody came to marry her, no man came to marry her, she remained with her parents. But the males went out. They were the adventurous spirit that went out and created the next home. And so the book is addressed to them. However, now here's a very unique thing. I'm going to stop the share here at the moment. Here's another unique, surprising thing that I learned about the book of Proverbs in relation to all the other wisdom literature. In every other wisdom literature that we are aware of, women were not wisdom teachers. There is no wisdom literature where the woman is a teacher. not in Egyptian literature, not in Mesopotamian literature, not in the Ugaritic or anything like that. But in the book of Proverbs, you have the women as teachers of wisdom. Chapter 1, verse 8, listen, my son, to your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's Torah, actually your mother's law. Chapter 10, chapter 6, you have it. And here, chapter 31 is Lemuel's mother, who is teaching her son wisdom. Okay. Now, according to the logic of the book of Proverbs, one becomes a wisdom teacher only after one has taught and accepted wisdom oneself. So how did the mother become a wisdom teacher to her sons? It's because she must have been taught the wisdom when she was a daughter in the house as well. So we must imagine that the whole book of Proverbs is addressed in the home to all the children, males and females, who sat down and taught this book, even though the book is, in its addresses, it is addressing the son.
So on the whole, if I can just interrupt you here for a second, in contrast to its ancient Near Eastern context, the book of Proverbs really demonstrates the elevation of women.
Very much so, yes.
But I'm getting some direct comments here. People really want to talk about sex, and the time is ticking. So what kind of wisdom does this book give us about sex? It's not Song of Solomon, we recognize that. But let's talk about sex, baby.
All right, well, if you go to Proverbs chapter 5, perhaps that's the most direct place where you get something stated about sex. So if we do that, Proverbs chapter 5. Now, Proverbs chapter 5 is a complete lesson. All 23 verses are related to one subject. And the subject is how to avoid dangerous women, women who are on the prowl to, especially adulterous women. The Proverbs assumes that there is an adulteress in the community that is very attractive, and the son may be tempted to sex with an adulteress. The book of Proverbs, as I discovered, was written to the males to safeguard them as they left the home against two archetypical dangers. One is the danger of easy money. The other is the danger of easy sex. The book is addressed to those teens who are just about to leave the home and enter into society. That transition period, which is very, very critical and very dangerous. For 17, 18 years, they have been under the protection of their family, their parents, who have watched over them. But now they're about to leave that protection and go out into the wide world to formulate their own family unit, to create their own family unit. And the parents want to ensure that as they leave their protective home and go out into the dangerous world, that their sons are safeguarded against these two archetypical dangers, easy money and easy sex. Because every teen, when they go out there, they encounter a world filled with wonderful stuff that they would like to have. But the problem is it all costs money. And being teens, they haven't worked long enough to collect money, and they don't have the wherewithal to pay for all this stuff. And so the temptation would be to obtain it criminally, to make money criminally. And so the first lesson, unbelievably, that the parents open up with is to warn their children about avoiding criminal gangs. Hard to believe that in Solomon's day, there were criminal gangs roaming around, enticing males to come and join them to make money by robbing and stealing and killing others, but there was. The other danger is, of course, the teen is going out there, his hormones are raging and so forth, and he wants to satisfy his sexual desires, and so he will have sex with the wrong person. And both of these dangers can destroy a young person even before they start. Okay. Even before they have a chance to establish them, they'll be destroyed. And so the parents are very much concerned to safeguard their children against those two dangers. And so chapter 5 is designed to a lesson designed by the parents to safeguard their son from getting into a wrong sexual relationship that could ruin him in every way. So if you start, you have the admonition here, my son, pay attention to my wisdom, turn your ear to my words of insight, that you may maintain discretion and your lips preserve knowledge. By the way, these words, wisdom, insight, discretion, knowledge, they're all aspects of wisdom. They're all different nuances of wisdom. And you need all of these different nuances to be a wise person. That you may maintain discretion, verse 2, and your lips may preserve knowledge. You can see this is all metaphoric and symbolic. How do lips guard knowledge? We don't have time to discuss all of that. For the lips of the adulterous woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. So what the father is saying here is, my son, you need to have wisdom on the tips of your lips to be able to speak it, because the adulterous woman is going to come and she's going to have very smooth lips, meaning smooth speech, enticing speech, tempting speech, alluring speech. And the way you combat it is with your wise speech. There's going to be a battle of words here. And the parents are trying to equip their son to have the right words on his lips to counteract the adulteress's tempting, enticing words, like Joseph had when Potiphar tempted him. So her speech is smoother than oil, but in the end, she is bitter as gall, sharp as a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. In other words, this sex with this woman is not going to take you to heaven. It's going to take you to hell, and avoid it at all costs. Now, in verses 7 to 14, the father will outline the danger. What is the danger of sex with the adulteress? And the danger is twofold. You will lose all of the family inheritance. When the husband finds out, he will go to the elders of the city and demand every penny that you have in compensation for you violating his wife. In that culture at that time, I guess there were two ways to deal with adultery. You could ask for the death of the adulterer, or you could, even better, ask for all the possessions of the adulterer. And the elders would have no choice but to grant it. And then furthermore, after he has taken all of your possessions, it says, he will take your physical strength. He will ask the elders to make you his slave, and you will labor for him the rest of your life until you are completely spent, and he will not let you go. You're going to be laboring for this person for the rest of your life. You're going to lose everything that the family amassed, all the treasure, and then you yourself are going to be reduced to the level of a slave. So that verse 11, at the end of your life, you will groan when your flesh and body are spent. He will have taken the best years of your strength and your life. There is repentance. The person realizes what a fool he was. You will say, how I hated discipline, how in my heart I spurned correction. I would not obey my teachers or turn my ears to instructors, and I was soon in serious trouble in the assembly of God's people. So what is the solution to sex with an adulteress? It is to have a robust, active sex life with your own wife. And so that's what he gets into in verses 15 to 20, using very provocative, very graphic sexual imagery. Drink water is a metaphor for satisfying your sexual needs and your sexual urges. So drink water from your own cistern. The cistern there and the well is a metaphor for the wife who will provide you with all your satisfaction for your sexuality, for all your sexual satisfaction. So satisfy your sexuality from your own cistern, running water from your own well. Should your springs overflow in the streets, your streams of water in the public squares. Do not go to the public realm to satisfy your sexual needs. Let them, that is the place in which you attain sexual fulfillment, be yours alone, never to be shared with strangers. That is, the father is calling for an exclusive sexual relationship between him, the husband, and his wife, not an open relationship either with many women or with prostitutes. And then verses 18 and 19 are very interesting. The father is praying that his son, he offers a prayer here, that his son will find a totally sexually satisfying wife, a wife that completely satisfies him sexually. And I always embarrass my students when I say to them, you know, your parents probably are wanting you to get married. Why don't you say to them, well, are you praying that I find a completely sexually satisfying wife? And so he says, may your fountain be blessed. The fountain there is a metaphor for his sexual relationship with his wife. And may you rejoice in the wife of your youth. The wife of your youth, that is actually an interesting turn of phrase, because it is assuming a lifelong sexual relationship with your wife. You married her in your youth, and you continue to have a sexual relationship with her even on into old age, that you do not dump her when she gets old and you try to find a new one, but rejoice in the wife of your youth. The way you rejoiced her when you both were young, continue that same joy and attitude. And then he uses animal imagery to describe the wife, which kind of probably sounds strange to us, but was very common back in those days. A loving doe, a graceful deer, may her breast satisfy you always. And the word for breast there is actually the Arabic, borrowed Arabic word for the nipples, the most erogenous part of the breast. May her breast satisfy you always, and may you ever be absolutely drunk out of your mind with her love, with love for her and her. Why, son, be intoxicated with another man's wife? Why embrace the bosom of a wicked man? Wow. So he is praying for a robust, active sexual relationship between the man and his wife as the antidote to sexual satisfaction in other illegitimate ways. And then finally,
Paul may have been picking this up in 1 Corinthians.
1 Corinthians 5, yes.
Surely, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, go ahead and finish it up. We got to wrap it up here pretty quick.
Yeah. So finally, you know, what is interesting is while he denounces adultery, up to now, he's only denounced it in terms of it'll ruin the family, it'll ruin you, the economic hardship, the physical hardship that it'll bring you if you become his slave and so forth. But finally, in verses 21 to 23, he comes down to the fact that it is a sin against God. For your ways are in full view of the Lord, and he examines all your paths. The evil deeds of the wicked ensnare them, the cause of their sins hold them fast. For lack of discipline, they will die, led astray by their own great folly. In other words, your own evil will create a noose to hang you.
So context for preaching this. And secondly, where's the text that tells us what the aphrodisiac is?
The aphrodisiac? I'm not really sure what you're talking about there, Ed.
To get our wife as interested as we are, eh?
Oh, yeah, no. No, I don't think I could answer that question where the aphrodisiac is,
I
but
know, I'm joking.
yeah, I realize that. But you know what we have to do here, of course, is once again, it's written from the male point of view. But in applying it hermeneutically, we would have to then make the mutatis mutandis, make the right adjustments to talk about the woman in this way as well, that she should find a husband that she finds sexually attractive and so forth, and she should find her full and complete and total sexual satisfaction in her marriage with her husband. So we'd have to make that adjustment as we preach it.
Okay. I think the way we could do a couple of questions, we didn't leave much time, I apologize, but I think the way to do this most relationally is just to stick up your hand. We don't have that many people online here. So if you stick up your hand, 20 are remaining, then you can just pose your question to Ivan. I'll call out your name, but go ahead, Leroy.
Thank you so much. This is really helpful. But thinking about it in terms of the issues that we are facing in the Christian Reformed Church, you did say this always assumes a heterosexual marriage. And so would you be able to draw out some implications then for these things that we're dealing with same-sex marriage, so-called, etc.?
Well, there are many ways in which to show how the Bible only supports heterosexual monogamous sex. And one of those would be that if same-sex relationships were something that is blessed by God, desired by God, intended by God, why is there not a single reference in the Bible to that sort of a relationship? But every single a reference in the Bible to marriage is to a heterosexual marriage. There is no advice on how to be a good husband and a husband, or a good wife and a wife, or anything like that. It is all assuming either directly or implicitly heterosexual marriage. And so if this is a great thing, why did not, I know this is an argument from silence, but sometimes arguments from silence do matter. And so that would be one thing. If this was something that God intended for human beings, he has given all this advice on how a man and woman should relate. But clearly, if it's two men that are relating, their needs are going to be way different. And that relationship is going to look very different than a relationship between a man and a woman. And God would have anticipated that and given us some advice on how two males are supposed to relate as a domestic pair and as a sexual partnership. But there is absolutely none, nothing at all. So that would be one thing. And so the Book of Proverbs, which is a book dedicated to wisdom, where you would think you would find something like that, because it covers just about every aspect of human life and how to conduct it wisely, that if same-sex marriage was a wise thing, where is the advice to how to have a wise same-sex relationship? There isn't. So that would be one way. And then, of course, there are all the positive ways in which to lay out the biblical position on marriage and sexuality. But I hope that helps even a little bit.
Absolutely. Others?
Could it just be that it is cultural for that era? And that's the argument that we hear now. It's a cultural thing. We've learned more. We know better now. They didn't know about it at that time.
Right. So the way I would answer that question is no, homosexuality has existed since time immemorial. It is known in the Bible. And rather than seeing it as a culturally acceptable thing, the Bible condemns homosexual relationships. So there is no way that the Bible allows for any sort of evolution or progressive revelation on this topic because wherever homosexuality is referred to in the Bible, it is positively condemned, and therefore leaves absolutely no room that this can change and later become acceptable. As you trace the trajectory of revelation from the Old Testament right into the New Testament, and even perhaps even the last book of the New Testament, written in the 90s, the book of Revelation at the very end has a very intriguing statement, does it not? Let me see if I can find it.
Of those who will not be in, it's 20, I think it's,
Pardon?
of those who will not be in. Those
Yeah,
who will be shut out. Yeah, I think it's chapter 21 or 22.
okay, 22:15.
Yeah.
But outside are the dogs. The dogs. Now, isn't that an interesting statement? Outside outside of the city, that is outside of the kingdom of God, the heavenly kingdom, are the dogs, the sorcerers, and the sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters and so forth. So what is this dogs about? Well, the only way you'll understand that is if you go to Deuteronomy 23:18. That is an allusion there to Deuteronomy 23:18, where Deuteronomy 23:18, the law of Moses says, you must not bring the wages of a prostitute, whether female or male, into the house of the Lord your God to fulfill any vow, because both are detestable to the Lord your God. Now, if you look at Deuteronomy 23:28, the word that the English translations give as prostitutes is the word dog. So if, for example, you look at a more literal translation like the New American Standard Bible, it will say, you shall not bring the earnings of a prostitute or the money for a dog into the house of the Lord your God as payment for any vowed offering. So the dog there is a metaphor for male on male sex prostitution. And you can see the imagery, because if you've seen dogs mating, they do not mate face to face. They mate back to front, as it were. And so it's homosexuality in that sense that is being talked about. And so right in the last book of the Bible, you have a prohibition against homosexuality, where those who practice sodomy will not be in the kingdom of God. So it would be very difficult to say that in progressive revelation now we know better, and we have advanced medically and whatnot to see that so that God would now approve it. Sometimes the argument is used analogy is made to inclusion of the Gentiles.
Right.
But maybe we're going off topic.
No, that's fine. Go. I think it's helpful. And I also think you can make the argument, of course, from the order of creation, because that argument is made. This is
absolutely
because it contravenes God's given order, and it's male betters, male who sleep with males, right?
Yeah, that is the foundational argument. Genesis 1
treating a man as a woman.
2. And those creational orders are what are now being established in redemption. In redemption, we are, as Martin Gunkel put it, protology is eschatology. That is, the end reflects the beginning, both in good and bad ways. So the beginning of the Bible talks about the sin and the fall and so forth, and all of this, and the end will begin to reflect that as well. We're going to see an increase of sin and Sodom and Gomorrah type behavior and all of that stuff. But beyond that, the beginning of how the world that God made was intended to function will be what will be in the end. And so, yeah, there is no same-sex relationships envisioned there, so there won't be in the end either. But I think the way Proverbs helps us this way, it is a book on how to live life, and in marriage and sexuality, the wisdom in that is heterosexual monogamous marriage, as we saw in 5:20 and following.
Okay, maybe one last question. We're at 12:30 here, our time. Otherwise, we'll just thank Ivan and be off to eat lunch or dinner or pre-dinner snacks. Oh, no, you're silent, Chad. There you go.
I don't think anybody wants to take that last question, but I'm just going to add my thanks to both of you too. I mean, Ivan, honestly, overall, a lot of our discussions, it was really good to hear a positive, picture of human sexuality and marriage. And so thank you for that. I mean, Proverbs 5, that was good stuff.
Yes.
So, yeah, this has been wonderful. So, hey, if anybody else has questions along the way, I mean, we certainly will continue these conversations. But Ivan, we're so thankful for you. You have a commentary out, so I put a link to that in the chat if anybody would like to check that out or just watch for what's coming out for the Gospel Coalition. But thank you again for your time, and God's blessings to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everybody. A pleasure to be with you all.
Great.